So now I'll go ahead and start with the introduction of our speakers. First we have Allie Goodwin-Gregg. She's a graduate of the P.I. Reed School of Journalism. She is currently the Chief Marketing Officer for MVP Financial Corp. with corporate offices throughout West Virginia and Northern Virginia. Her background is extensive with both public and private work experiences, including management and ownership with 2 marketing communication firms. Then we have Larry Messina. He joined West Virginia's Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety as its communications director in August 2013. Previously, he served for 11 years as State House correspondent and political editor for the Associated Press in Charleston. And before his tenure at AP, Messina was a legal affairs reporter for the Charleston Gazette, where his writing won numerous awards from the West Virginia Press Association. Larry is also a graduate of Wheeling Jesuit University. And finally, we have Chris Dale. He is a West Virginia University grad. He obtained his bachelor's degree in psychology and master's of science in journalism with a specialization in public relations. Upon graduation, Chris worked as a manager and public affairs officer for the American National Red Cross for 15 years. Chris currently serves as Director of Communications for Morgantown Utility Board and freelances feature writings. At this time, I also want to go ahead and take the opportunity to tell you all to live tweet during this entire discussion any key points that you think need to be brought up with the hashtag WVU PRSSA. Also, with any questions that you have, tweet at our speakers. Their handles are right there in front of their names. And at the end of your question, please follow up with the hashtag WVU PRSSA. And now I'm going to give it over to Katie Hiller.
Before you turn on, will you make sure everybody understood it? Ask if they have any questions.
Oh, yeah. Does anybody have any questions about the hashtag or anything, really? I'm sorry, Katie. I'm sorry. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. It's very hot in here. Allie, please accept my most humblest apology. This is our first speaker, Allie Goodwin-Gregg.
Thank you. I thought maybe I was the reason it was hot in here, but you know.
Yeah.
Being as old as I am, I'm somehow doubtful that that's the case. Good afternoon. I apologize I was a little bit tardy. I always underestimate the number of you and the fact that you all drive 2 cars on campus, and it makes it very difficult to get through sometimes. When I talked to Dr. Pressgrove about what we were going to talk about today and what our assignments were, my job today is just to kind of frame the issue and talk to you about crisis communication. I know we have a broad range of students in the room. You have some freshmen, some first year in the J school, some of you first classes you're taking in public relations and in the public relations practice, and then some of you are seniors, likely doing your capstone and working ahead, but still kind of a quick review on what is a crisis. You know, if we look at our textbook, a crisis is going to be defined as an extraordinary event or series of events that are going to impact a product, reputation, financial stability of an organization, the health or well-being of employees, neighbors, the community, or the public at large. What's interesting about a crisis is only about 14% of crises that happen each year are unplanned, unexpected. Oh my gosh, we didn't know that that was going to happen. The common denominator for successful crisis management and effective media relations is planning. And you have to be planning. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk today specifically about the Charleston water crisis, but also just wanted to kind of couch what defines a crisis and how does it become a crisis. Because I would argue that at its core, the issue of everything that happened in Charleston is a water crisis, not a public relations crisis. It became a public relations crisis because of lack of planning, inconsistent response, being ill prepared, and putting yourself to the story as opposed to the story itself, which was contaminated water. So when we talk about planning and what we need to do in the sense of a crisis or the sense of emergency, our primary objective, and I'm going to speak to you from an objective of public relations practitioners, what our job is in a crisis and what we do. How many of you have had Journalism 1, or whatever they call it now, the introductory journalism course? Everybody's had it. How many of you have had PR 215 or are in it now? Okay, great. So the things I say are not new to you. These are things that you've learned in prior classes. Our jobs as practitioners is to instill a sense of confidence. We know what we're doing. We know what the issue is. We know how to fix it. We're going to make it better. We're going to reassure in all interested parties that we're managing the incident responsibly, that we're going to resolve the situation without further impact. We want to minimize the potential damage to the company, but also recognizing the damage that's ongoing to the communities where we live and work. We need to be proactive. We need to be productive. We need to be consistent. We need to have designate a single spokesperson that comes out and represents the voice of the company. We need to be accessible. We need to communicate with our key publics and identify key messages, all of which, as you know from your studies, because I know you're all A students, is public relations at its core. It's relating to the public. And in times of crisis, this is exacerbated. It becomes even more critical. In a time of crisis, what we learn in the foundation of public relations is absolutely magnified, because we're dealing with people who are hurt or sick or impacted or scared. And that's why effective communications is so key. Ivy Lee, who's credited by many scholars to be the founder of modern day public relations, really established public outreach and communication strategies which are critical when dealing with a crisis and addressing a crisis. Business and industry should align themselves with the public interest. Deal with the top executive, and this is critical. Deal with the top executive and carry out no program until it has the active support and endorsement of management. Maintain open communications with the news media. Emphasize the necessity of humanizing the business and understand that you're dealing with people and you need to relate to them. When we think about, what makes a crisis is very different across different companies. Yeager Airport in Charleston dealt with a crisis very effectively. They're one of my favorite good examples. They had a U.S. Air flight that was taking off, and it had to abort its takeoff. I don't know how many of you have ever flown in or out of Charleston, but you're on top of a mountain. So if they're telling you they're going to abort, you're just hoping that you're not going over that. They aborted it. They had to do the foam landing. They had to do all of that. They shut down the airport. The other key point in a crisis that we need to remember is you can only talk about what you own. Yeager Airport could not talk about U.S. Air. They could not talk about the pilot's decision to abort. They could not talk about where people were being redirected or if tickets were going to be refunded or what the issue was. They could only talk about the airport and the impact on the airport. And what they did is they shut the airport down. They shut the airport down. Media couldn't access it. No one could get to it. But they themselves understood the need to communicate with the public. The neighborhoods below the airport, the people in the city of Charleston that see planes flying and taking off directly into the city skyline, they understood that they needed to communicate. They became a resource. They had instant credibility with the media because they put out pictures. They sent pictures out of the plane. They evaluated and said the plane is being cleaned up. Emergency personnel has arrived on the scene. They became a resource. We understand from U.S. Airways that they will be making a statement at noon. They talked about what they owned. They didn't assume that they could talk about what anybody else had with that issue. Not the passengers, not the airlines, not TSA, not the tower, not emergency personnel. They talked about what they could own at the airport. It was a good example. There's lots of bad examples. BP comes to mind. Domino's Pizza. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Domino's. It's one of my favorite bad crisis examples. They have two people in a North Carolina store location who think it would be hilarious to do gross things to pizza and food. They're so smart, we'll call them the Brain Trust. The Brain Trust decided to film this with color commentary and put it on YouTube. Domino's underestimated the impact of social media. And in less than 3 days, it had more than 1 million viewer impressions on YouTube. Their stock plummets. People start second guessing. Ooh, I got a pizza from there. Maybe, is it the same thing? I'm not sure what's going on. And the spokesperson, 3 days into the crisis, said, yeah, we got blindsided by two idiots with a video camera. You got blindsided by lack of preparation. You got blindsided by thinking that you could bunker down and think that it would go away. Social media is today's word of mouth times 10. So if I'm tweeting something, it not only reaches the 500 people that take an interest in the inane things that I say on social media, it reaches all the people that they retweet it to. Then they start talking about it, and they tell somebody, and they tell somebody, and they tell somebody, and so on. And all of a sudden it's out there. And it was out there for 4 days before Domino's did anything. So let's talk about the Charleston water crisis and what happened, and just give a quick timeline. January 9th, I think it's January 9th. I mean, people are saying, some were saying January 8th, they smelled things in the water, or smelled things in the air. January 9th, it's identified that there has been a spill. Freedom Industries is identified as the culprit. The governor declares a state of emergency. Please know I am compressing. I am compressing the timeline just for the point of our conversation. They leak a crude MCHM, a chemical mixture used in coal production and coal cleaning process, upstream from the West Virginia American Water Treatment Plant. It's estimated at that time it was only 5,000 gallons of this crude chemical substance that's leaked into the river. The site of Freedom Chemical is kept open. So when we go back and we talk about the principles of public relations, immediately there are gaping holes in managing the crisis. Immediately, the site was left open. Reporters were on the site. Reporters were able to walk around and take pictures with their cell phones, which they subsequently tweeted, of the leaked tank. Here's what it looks like, click. And they're putting that out. Freedom's first interaction with the media came 10 or 12 hours after it had been reported to announce that they'd hired a public relations firm. That's their first interaction. We can't tell you what's going on. We can't tell you how we're fixing it. We can't tell you what we're doing, but we have hired public relations professionals. Now, how many people in little white houses is that their priority to know what's going on? What do you think they wanted to know? They wanted to know what was happening. They wanted to know how it had impacted their water supply. Are they safe? Are they not safe? Do they need to evacuate? What did they need to do? And they weren't getting that information. January 10th, the next day, it was Friday, West Virginia American Water holds a press conference which shines a light on how much they didn't know. They're unfamiliar with the chemical spill. They're unfamiliar with the process for testing the toxicity in the water. They're unable to communicate the danger of the chemical to drink or breathe in the air. Freedom announces that they're going to have a press conference. They have their press conference, which starts late. Their press conference is held on the grounds of their plant. The plant manager comes to speak. He steps up to the podium, which has no malt box, which means that all the reporters are standing there with his microphone and given immediate proximity to him. So rather than being where you guys are as we're sitting here, me speaking to you, telling you what I know, interacting you with questions, and then removing myself from the situation, I now have you surrounding me. He was ill prepared. He didn't know how to respond to questions effectively. And the most critical error he made was he got a little choked up and got a beautiful, crisp bottle of Aquafina handed to him from off the camera. He then goes to walk away, and one of the reporters, to her credit, screams out, "What? We're not finished. I'm not finished with you. We have more questions." And he turns around, again, ill-prepared, unable to make the break or say, "We'll follow up," or do whatever, and comes back to engage them. Not everyone can hear. Not all media outlets can hear. Not everyone can engage. So twice we show how ill-prepared he is. So what was a water crisis, what is a lack of communications crisis, has now become a public relations crisis for the water company, the chemical company, the state of West Virginia, because people are not getting information. And if we go back to our core, remember our foundation for those public relations principles, we have to communicate. The public wants to know if this is impacting them. It, at its very, very definition, is a crisis. It's impacting 300,000 people throughout a 6-county? Nine-county area. And we can't get any information. We're unfamiliar and we don't know. And no one will say, "I don't know." We're just unfamiliar, we're not sure. And they're just waiting. Press conferences are scheduled that are delayed for extended periods of time and then canceled. Poorly handled. So that's on January 10th. January 12th, the estimates on the impact and the number of the amount of the chemical leaked continue to evolve. The Charleston media starts reporting, going back, looking at, U.S. Chemical Safety Board came in and urged the state to figure out in the Chemical Valley how to manage a toxic chemical spill. What would you do in the event of a toxic chemical spill? And the allegation is made that the state ignored them. The state didn't want to talk about it. January 13th, the ban on water that West Virginia American Water has put out starts being lifted. People can now start using water. 2 days later, the CDC says, yeah, but if you're pregnant or a child, you shouldn't drink the water or submerge yourself in it. So the water, which is now being lifted, the information that people are getting is now saying pregnant women can't drink it, you shouldn't bathe in it, you shouldn't put your children in it. On January 18th, the first all clear is given. January 21st, 12 days post-crisis, Freedom comes out and discloses that an additional chemical has leaked. An additional chemical has leaked in the water, and they won't give the exact identity or information about the chemical, citing that it is proprietary. It's a proprietary substance. January 24th, the state DEP claims that Freedom knew on day one what the issue was, and that they had what the chemicals were and what had leaked into the water, and they did not disclose it. On January 27th, estimates bump up to 10,000 gallons. Double the initial estimates had leaked into the water. So when we talk about opportunities for improvement, I think that all of us would agree as public relations professionals that if you're drawing straws in a crisis communication and you draw the straw to be the Monday morning quarterback, it's the best of all worlds. Because you're not the one in the heat of the moment. You're not the one who has to respond to it. You're the one who can sit back objectively and say, I certainly wouldn't have thrown the ball that way. I wouldn't have called that play. But having said that, we as an industry cannot get better, cannot improve ourselves, cannot maintain our credibility if we don't take the opportunity to step back and figure out what the issues were and how we can improve upon them. First is the context, how the message was delivered. Was it effectively delivered? The spokesperson for West Virginia American Water had a war, if you will, of high school proportion on Facebook. Journalists are attacking her personally. She responds on her personal page. It can't happen like that. It's not a personal issue. It can't be broken down into a personal level. And we're all so active in social media now that it makes it very hard. But the beauty of social media is I only have to be as social as I want to be. If you say something I don't like, I defriend you. You say something I don't want to respond to, I don't have to respond. It doesn't have to keep going in this war where we keep going back and forth. You can at any time opt out. But the issue became the context of message delivery. What West Virginia American Water tried to do was to protect themselves. It wasn't their issue, but it became their issue because they couldn't answer questions about it. They knew the plant was there, and it starts becoming this fingers pointing at them. Why didn't you do something? Why didn't you do more when you had the chance? So they tried to protect themselves. And what they said was, send us your questions, we'll get answers to your questions, we'll communicate those back to you, and then you can do their story. The problem was there was the perception that it was being edited. As opposed to just running a pure B-roll of the questions being asked and answered, they were edited down for time and then put up on a satellite so TV, radio, newspaper could pull down what they wanted to and then run it. It was perceived that it was being spun, which in our public relations world is a dirty word. We're not spinning, trying to communicate. So how could they effectively take a step back and figure out a way to communicate? The way that the message is delivered is critical. The media is not our audience. The media is not our audience. Shareholders are our audience. Our neighbors are our audience. Politicians are our audience. Leaders in the community are our audience. Civic leaders. The media is the means to communicate. The media is not an audience because they have a job to do equally. Their job is to tell the story. Their job is to communicate what has happened, what it means to you. And they can only do that as effectively as you allow them to do it. And if you are stonewalling them or not giving them information or trying to shut down and have a bunker mentality, it impacts your credibility. And it means that they no longer find you credible, so they're going to go find a source that is credible to tell the story, because 300,000 people in 9 counties don't have water. I think that the other lessons that we can talk about are effective planning. The press conference at Freedom Industries was laughable. It was unacceptable the way it was handled. Just the basic preparation of having one mic that everybody could plug into to hear. He was clearly ill-prepared when he came out to talk, but making your public relations firm news before you talk about the crisis at hand is a fatal flaw. It's critical. Public relations is not news. It's not news. Our job is to help the CEO and managers communicate to the news effectively so that people in our communities where we live and work know what's going on. We are not the story, and we cannot allow ourselves to become the story. This is a public relations crisis due to mismanagement on all counts.
Larry, you'd be next up if you want to go ahead and start some remarks.
Sure, and I'm coming to you as someone who's fairly new to the public relations aspect of communications. As was mentioned, I was a journalist, a daily journalist for more than 20 years, and most recently for the Associated Press. And so I don't necessarily have some of the training in things like crisis communications, but as a daily journalist, I did cover breaking news stories, and so I try to draw on those experiences in terms of understanding what the public and what the media would want to know during a crisis like this and how to provide that information. And I did it both as from a conventional standpoint, but also trying to use social media as best I could. And I'll start with how I approached it for my department. Military Affairs and Public Safety oversees a number of divisions and agencies, and several played major roles in this crisis. The Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management helped communicate with county officials, with local officials, particularly making sure that they were aware of the crisis, and folks on the state level understood what they needed, what their people needed, and the bottom line there was, once we realized that the water company could no longer deliver safe water to 100,000 customers, which is the low estimate is 300,000 people. It could easily be more than that in this 9-county area, that the water was only good for sanitation and fire protection, that clearly we needed to bring massive quantities of drinkable water into those communities as quickly as possible. And so what we try to do is, these are the sorts of things we do plan for, not necessarily a specific crisis like this, but the rapid acquisition of resources like potable water. And so we were, I think, maybe by mid to late January, we had brought into the area about 20 million bottles of water, millions of gallons of water through bulk tankers, and we're able to fairly efficiently distribute that to the communities that were without drinking water as a result of this crisis. And we try to make sure that people were aware of what we were doing, and most importantly to them, how to get to the water. And we used both, we reached out to the media to make sure they understood how we were distributing water to the counties, and then where the counties were making that water available to families and to businesses. And then we use social media. We use the Facebook pages of that division and other divisions to make sure people knew who they could contact if they needed water, if they were shut-ins or they knew it was shut-ins, how they could get water to those households. And we use Twitter. We use the Twitter account, my personal Twitter account, as well as the Twitter accounts for agencies within my department. My department also includes the National Guard, and they played a huge role in this, not only in the distribution of water, but also in the sampling of water in places like hospitals and in schools and in the distribution system. And from a communication standpoint, the goal there was to make sure people were aware that we were closely watching the water and testing it to see to what degree this contaminant could be found. Could be found in the hospitals, could be found in the drinking fountains of our schools, and then could be found in the distribution lines that fed this very large area serving hundreds of thousands of people. And in those two areas, I believe that we were successful in that people were able to get water very quickly, and they knew where to find drinking water, get access to drinking water when they needed it. And that was really the key thing. Is hard to imagine how a part of this country, as many people as we're talking about, being deprived of drinking water for days on end. And then the other aspect was trying to demonstrate to the public what we were doing to remedy the situation in the long term. Basically, as cleaner water replaced bad water, how that was showing up in their communities. And then, as Ali mentioned, when folks could begin the process of flushing the lines within their own home to resume using water from the water company itself. And again, we used, we appealed to the media to make sure they knew what we were doing. We used social media to communicate, where we were going out, to test the water, and Twitter as well. And one thing that we tried to do within my department was not only help the media with the complicated issues and the various things that were being done, because of course it's not just delivering water. The DEP was involved. DEP was involved controlling that site and cleaning up those contaminants, or overseeing the cleanup of those contaminants. Health and Human Resources was involved because this was a public health crisis, and they were keeping tabs on the people calling the poison center, the people visiting hospitals, the people seeking admittance to hospitals because of symptoms they were attributing to this contaminant. We ended up creating a resource page where anybody could go, and we actively promoted this resource page on Facebook, on Twitter. We made sure reporters were aware of it. We mentioned it during our press conferences. There are literally hundreds of documents on that page, and we continue to update it. We made sure people could see what the test results were, how they could contact, at the time, local officials to know where the clean water was, how to contact the poison center, where to bring all those empty plastic bottles for recycling if that's what they wanted to do. Whatever information the CDC was providing us about this contaminant and their advice regarding protecting public health. We try to make that a single source resource for both the media and the public, so they could understand what information we had and what we were trying to do with the situation. But that kind of leads to the overarching problem, and that is the testing that we were doing, the timetable for restoring water through the distribution lines was really based on the guidance that the governor's office received from, and the Bureau of Public Health received from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And if those who have followed this are familiar perhaps with, at some point very early on, the CDC said, if you can, in concentrations below 1 part per million, you should be able to protect public health. And that's a very hard thing to communicate, particularly if you don't have a chemistry background like myself. And as Ali mentioned, at some point further on in the process, the CDC then said, well, if you're pregnant, maybe you shouldn't drink it, even if it is the concentration is below 1 part per million. And then we learned that there was another chemical in the tank that leaked. And the question was, does the 1 part per million standard hold up given this other chemical? And then the real problem, I think, was so little was known about this material. This material that in fact is used at dozens of coal prep plants around the state, and I would imagine numerous other prep plants in other coal producing states. Very little was known about what would happen to people if they drank it, or if it was in their water supply and they ingested it. And so the whole question became, when was it safe? And really all we had was the guidance that we had gotten from the CDC. And when reporters would go to the CDC, apparently the CDC didn't want to talk to them. And that became a huge problem, because they were, these were the brightest minds in the federal government giving us the best advice we thought we could find. And when we would try to explain that advice to the media, and the media then went to the CDC to get a better understanding, the CDC wouldn't talk to them. And we tried to address it the best we could. And at some point, we did have a press conference where we brought in the top officials from the CDC and from EPA, so they could explain in front of microphones where they were coming from in terms of why they gave us the advice they gave. And the conference itself went all right. But then afterward, in one-on-one, reporters were pressing these officials and saying, well, is the water safe? And we found that these officials would not use the word safe. And this was, weeks after all of the zones had been cleared so people could resume using water in their households. Businesses had reopened. And people were learning that these officials who were given this advice would not say it was safe. They would say it's appropriate for use and things like that. I don't believe it was until February 21st that, and realize this, the do not use alert was issued on January 9th, that a CDC official actually was willing to use the word safe. And so in terms of trying to communicate to the public about what we were trying to do to protect public health, to restore their water, to make sure they had safe water, we had this uncertainty and this position by these federal experts to contend with, and it made things very difficult. And I think that's why, to a large degree, we're in the situation we are now in terms of the level of skepticism and distrust that persists in the affected communities. I think that's about it from my perspective.
I'm going to actually use the overhead here. I apologize to you too. What I want to do is get in some details of what colleagues discussed here. How many of you, if you were in Charleston, would drink the water? Would drink the water? Feel comfortable with it? Not too many? Why is that? I got to get my glasses. I'm sorry. Why is that? You've been told many times by many scientists and professionals that the water's safe. Why is it you wouldn't want to drink it?
Lack of trust.
Lack of trust. All right. Yeah, I got it. Oh, there it is. Sorry. I have like 5 versions of this stuff going on. Oh, yeah. So lack of trust, right? And as I look at this, and I was asked to talk a little bit about the issue, and with me working for Morgantown Utility Board here in Morgantown, the issues we face is associated with that trust. And what are the barriers to moving forward? And that barrier really is trust. And it's very important, and this is how you can break trust down to these components. And when you look at these, and I'll keep these in the slides, what I'm going to do is give examples what my colleagues were talking about earlier in terms of how we lost that trust and a lot of the issues and inconsistent messages that occurred during the event. And these are some examples of why we lost trust in this event, why you don't feel the water's safe. We started off with lack of knowledge about the chemicals. We didn't know about the chemical. Even when we learned what chemical it was. Cohesive messaging inconsistent messaging was a big issue. The failure to utilize spokespersons was huge. And I'm going to give you examples of all these, show you how all these flowed out during the crisis event, okay? I'm not going to go through all of these. I can make this available too to students afterward. Failure to prepare is a huge one. And I want to back up one more. This last point here is very important in going against primitive instincts. It's very hard to communicate something's safe when your primitive instincts, you can smell it in your water, tells you it's not safe. No matter how many times I tell you it's safe, you can smell it, but it's still below the 1 part per million threshold. It's still safe to drink. Primitive instincts are telling you something completely different, right? And that's what you're battling against. And that's a trust issue. This is how it happened. Again, you'll see these up in the top right-hand corner. The issues of trust, and you'll see how these play out across the timeline of events that occurred. And this timeline is compressed, okay? Started on noon on January 9th, that West Virginia American Water learned about the spill. Initially, they were told it was a flocculant. The flocculant is a substance that we use to treat in water everywhere. What it does, it basically binds with dirt and other minerals, and it actually makes them heavy so they float to the bottom. We can remove that instantly from the water. So that's something that a water treatment plant wouldn't be concerned about, and that's what they thought it was. Well, later on, they learned that it wasn't a flunk, it was something else. West Virginia Water decided, hey, we believe our carbon-activated filters can treat this substance. So they weren't concerned with it. Their filters became saturated, and about 4 p.m. that day, they could smell it in their water. Then that's when they knew that they had a major problem. At 6:16, they posted on Facebook, the do not use order. And last week I met with the Kanawha County Deputy of Emergency Planning, who was telling me when this event occurred, the way they notified people was actually using the same broadcast system they use for weather emergencies. Used everything except for the sirens. So they used that system to alert people, do not use this water, which I thought was a pretty unique communication system that tells you, as a communicator, you have to go beyond just social media, press releases, and things like that, and really look how you can communicate in emergency. On January 10th, I didn't really get the time in this because I kind of put this timeline together afterwards. After I didn't keep track of it as the event was unfolding. West Virginia American Water holds a press conference. And at this press conference, they really couldn't answer a lot of information, a lot of basic questions people were asking them. And as you can see here, I highlight some of the things in red. They ask, is the leak continuing? I don't know. I can't tell you if the leak's continuing or not. I don't know. We're not sure what's going on. When asked about the safe levels of the chemical, the response was, well, we know 1 part per million is safe with rats. And this is again where having a spokesperson that can provide information and maybe be a little bit more sensitive and knows what to say compared to scientists. I work with scientists and engineers every day. And the information they would tell you would be a little bit different than information I will tell you. It would be delivered in a little bit different way. Something Ali had mentioned about the press conference. It looked like it was in a parking lot. Was it in a parking lot outside the facility? Yeah, they held it in a parking lot. And the CEO or president of Freedom Industries made the comment, it's been a long day, I'm having problems talking, I'd appreciate it if we could wrap this thing up. It's not very compassionate, is it? So already in this process, you can see that trust is eroding quickly. People aren't giving good information. People don't have answers if that's what people want. And they're not being very compassionate toward the people that are affected, right? Then later, Governor Tomlin himself mentioned that he's had no contact with Freedom Ministries. They're not communicating out. And then Ali mentioned this. This is the Facebook post by the girlfriend of the president of Freedom Ministries. And this is a good point because I know with Morgantown Utility Board, when we go through the crisis communications planning part, is people have to understand, it's not just you I'm worried about, it's your kids, it's your girlfriends, it's your brothers and sisters, and they have to understand too, that it's not their responsibility to provide information to the public or comment on it whatsoever. In fact, a lot of companies, and I know Morgantown Utility Board is one of them, our general manager doesn't have a personal Facebook account or a personal Twitter account. Morgantown Utility Board has one, we started that, but they don't have their own because they want to stay away from that and their wives and children don't have it. And again, this is the sister, the girlfriend, posting things. So you can see, they're not doing themselves favors. And the issue of trust is being eroded further and further, isn't it? It's upsetting people. They're not being compassionate. They're not acting with confidence whatsoever. January 12th, they begin flushing. January 13th, they begin telling people that your water's safe to drink. When they begin flushing, these kind of pictures started hitting Twitter. If any of you have ever turned your water off and turned it back on, you know what happens, right? So imagine millions of miles, maybe not millions of miles, but certainly tens of thousands of miles of pipes. All of a sudden you're flushing water through them. What's going to happen? you're gonna get some discoloration and maybe some rust or some things that look like gravel, something like that in your pipelines, right? But this wasn't communicated out that this was gonna occur. So it started alarming people again. And people are already on edge. And then, after he said it's okay to drink it, January 15th, oh, if you're pregnant, by the way, you probably won't have contact with the water. So now, we're back to square one for a lot of people. And the anger is increasing again. I thought this is interesting. This is a quote from Charleston Gazette from a physician. They were looking at people coming to the hospitals and asking them, just talking to the physicians and trying to find out what the symptoms people were showing and whether or not the water's safe. And of course, the physician there states, well, we're not the ones saying the water's safe. So that's a messaging issue again. We're not saying it's safe, they're saying it's safe. And I caught this, it was a very quick interview. There's a video of it that shows the external affairs manager for West Virginia American Water, who's walking out of a building and a reporter stops her and asks her, is the water safe? And this is when no one's admitting it's safe yet. They're having problems with that. Yeah, it's safe. You can use it for whatever you want to use it for. So people are being yo-yoed back and forth. They're getting inconsistent information. And then they have another issue where they have to have a do not use order for certain communities. So they have to issue that. So now confusion's really growing. And actually, this gentleman here, I'm traveling with tomorrow. One thing they realized was this chemical is a cocktail of chemicals. It's not a single chemical. And when they tested this chemical, they didn't know which one of these parts of this chemical, these ingredients, that they were testing for, and they impacted each one separately, as well as the impact of each one mixed. So now, there's more concerns rising. Freedom Ministries files for bankruptcy. Many people have come upset for it because now they said they're going to escape. I'm just going to blow through some of these here. Oh, January 20th, press conference. Governor Tomlin asked, is the water safe? Well, it's up to you to decide whether the water is safe or not. And again, he's not going to say the water's safe. And that's what people are the media is constantly asking these folks, is the water safe? Is the water safe? No one wants to admit to it. Then they admit to it, then they retract it. And then they try to get across the 1 part per million. And it is hard to explain. Then the second chemical is identified, right? So now trust is eroding further. You guys remember this? A gentleman from Marshall University comes out and said, oh, there's formaldehyde in the water. So then this raises more concern. And then they have to come back, no, there's not formaldehyde in water. And then February 10th, they have a hearing in Charleston, and Governor Manchin, well, they all did actually, everyone in this committee, asked, is the water safe? Can any of you tell me the water's safe? And none of them want to admit to it. And the West Virginia American Water's response is that American Water doesn't set the standards on what's safe. Someone else tells them what the standards are for safety, CDC. And this is from the West Virginia Bureau of Public Health, the head of the organization. Everyone has a different definition of safe. Some people think it's safe to jump off a bridge on Bridge Day. It's probably not a very good comparison, right? Drinking the water is compared to jumping off a bridge on Bridge Day. Some people think that's safe, some people don't. So they create a lot of confusion, a lot of distrust. And we felt this a lot in Morgantown too. People are constantly calling us, is the water safe? Yeah, the water safe. And the good thing for us, from Morgan County Utility Board's perspective, is that it creates us an opportunity to communicate out. Because now we have a lot of interest in our water system we never had before. People take it for granted. Turn your faucet, it comes out, right? In Morgantown, we have certain safeguards to help protect against that, namely another water source. And sometimes we have to activate that when we can stop our water tank. If we get notification that something occurred, we can stop our water tank from the river and take it all from another reservoir. And we have lots of water in storage as well. So we have other protections we can use. But the problem with those protections, it comes down to one thing, and that's communications. If somebody owns a chemical company and they spill whatever they want to spill in the water supply, if they don't tell anyone, all the precautions in the world aren't going to work. So that's the real challenge, is communications. It all comes down to communications. Developing relationships with those organizations, with those companies, so they feel comfortable communicating with you. And the way we get through them in Morgantown is, if your company has a leak, let us know, because we can help you deal with it. We can avoid what happened in Charleston. If you let us know, we can turn off our water intakes and take water elsewhere. And that's a huge benefit to offer. And like any relationship, it's a two-way street, right? There has to be benefits for both people to make it work. So I just want to talk about some things. Where do you go from here? Just some points, just from my perspective solely. First of all, if there's water leak, time is their friend, right? I say time is their friend because they have summer coming up, and there's a lot of good things. You know, people use water in summer for different things that they can build upon to show it's safe. And also, the good news for them too is they have almost 12 months from time of the leak to get to the point of where people start recapping the year and reminding people what happened, right? Advertising. Some things that they want to do, of course, is admit what occurred, practice empathy, position themselves as part of the community. Just remind people that, you know, we've been here for years, X number of years, helping our community, and we're comprised of community members. Once you get past the initial messaging of, yeah, it occurred, is don't look back. Don't talk about it anymore. Opinion leaders, and there's a lot of this goes into preparedness. You know, Morgan County Utility Board, we're constantly looking at opinion leaders. Who can help? Who can help us spread the word in case of a disaster? Who's got influence in certain groups? And these are things you want to look for. And focus on, your messaging wants to focus on executive functioning, but includes sensory information as well, okay? Emotional attachments. And by that, you can use facts in the messaging going forward. However, you should overlay that with images of maybe kids playing in water, like I said, summertime, right? The family, things like that, okay? Continued outreach, grassroots efforts. You want to sponsor some groups that participate in water, keep an eye on water. I know Morgan County Utility Board, we sponsor a lot of events like water festivals and things like that. The other organizations do. Because those are important relationships for us to have. Then, of course, just prepare. You got to prepare for these things. And the preparation is key. And there's so many different things you can do. Prepare that, especially developing relationships, practicing communications. Every day we practice things. I know, Mom, when I'll do a traffic report. There's Sunset Street's closed. And I can use Twitter for that. And that's important because it's practice for us to practice the systems. I get the information from these people and I communicate it here. It's all practice. We update our website to provide important information. You know, maybe one of our servers is down for customer information, customer account access. We communicate that. That's a little crisis. The crisis occur all the time. So, and it's good practice for you. It's a good time to communicate, develop relationships, and test those systems within your own organization. And finally, I'll just tell you this. Another thing we focus on, and we'll continue focusing on as this event continues, is preparing the community. We want to be part of that. We want to make sure people understand that they need to have so much water 72 hours of water on hand for themselves and their families. It's critical. We want to be a part of that communications effort. And also, that's an important relationship for us too, because that's the OES, Office of Emergency Services, who communicates out that information. So as you look at this event, just keep in mind that this event, anytime you're in the industry and something negative impacts or occurs with a company within that industry, it's going to come back on you too. So you have to be prepared yourself. And you have to watch out for a lot of these things, because a lot of the examples I gave in here, this presentation are things that could have been avoided if they had prepared, if they had used spokespersons, if they had the proper relationships, if they had coordinated things a little bit better. Right? I'm not going to go any further than
All right, thank you to all of our speakers for very insightful information. We are going to start the Q&A session now. And again, I'm Katie Heller, and I'll be moderating this portion. Okay, the first question goes to Allie. What are the corporate communication takeaways from this crisis, and what did Freedom Industries do right, and what did they do wrong?
I think that the takeaways would be preparedness is key. Planning. If you manufacture toxic chemicals, anticipating a leak or an issue with those chemicals is something that you should be prepared for. If you fly airplanes, you should be prepared that things happen with airplanes. Airplanes crash. Airplanes are late. People get stuck on the runway for 2 hours because of ice storms. Things happen. You should be prepared. Preparedness is key, and it can't be underestimated. When I evaluate what Freedom did right and what Freedom did wrong, I struggle with identifying the good. I struggle to identify the good. And I struggle to identify the good because it comes down to me to credibility. In this business, all you have is credibility. All you have is the opportunity to communicate, and you're given one shot, and in something that lives as long as this lived, it continually became an issue of credibility. I mean, even as recently as, 5 or 6 days ago, where we're talking about paying the CEO, and we're in bankruptcy proceedings, 6 days into the crisis, and things like that, it became an issue of credibility. And I think that if it takes 12 days to identify what all the chemicals were, and if they knew, and those are a lot of ifs, I mean, I don't know for sure, but if all of those things are accurate, I struggle to find the good things that they did. I think that had they been more forthcoming, had they been honest, had they utilized an integrated approach to communicate it and not just relied on a one-off press conference and then going completely dark, it could have been a different situation.
Larry, the next one is for you. What are your recommendations for monitoring and managing legislative policy and political communications at a time like this? Well,
as folks may know, the legislature was actually in session. I believe that the leak occurred the day after the governor's state address, which opens the 60-day regular session. And so a great deal of the debate during those 60 days was centered on this crisis and how to respond to it. And the result ultimately was what's called Senate Bill 373. And it does a number of things seeking to address both this specific sort of instance. For instance, there's a whole new body of law governing above-ground storage tanks, and that's the kind of tank we're talking about in this situation. But there's also a larger topic addressed, and that is making sure that communities are more aware, and the drinking water providers are more aware of what is what could potentially pose a threat to the water supply. And there are provisions in there that speak to the kind of planning that public water systems must do. For instance, in the case of a utility that has just one water intake, as the case of this water company, they should be doing a cost-benefit analysis of one or more of 4 alternatives, building a second water intake, having an emergency supply that lasts X number of days, being able to tap into an untainted neighboring water supplier, and things like that. So I think that folks need to pay close attention to what the final product of that bill was, and then see how it's carried out. I wish I was more familiar with it. I did try to keep tabs on it throughout the 60 days, and it changed a lot, as people who may have followed the legislative process. That bill went through a number of permutations. The governor introduced a bill as part of his legislative agenda, and ultimately what passed was a different vehicle that borrowed from his legislation, but had other components in it from other proposals. Really, we're talking about changes that will be implemented and mandated on the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Health and Human Resources. But the bottom line is the legislature did respond. Now, whether people believe they responded properly, I think might be in the eye of the beholder, but also as we start seeing these provisions take effect and these mandates and their deadlines come up. And I was on to Mr. Dale earlier before the start, and there's also a federal legislation being debated. And that actually is something I think is probably more important, because every community potentially has a Freedom Industries near their water intake. And so rather than a patchwork of laws, maybe there should be an overarching federal law that helps us in this area. There are already actually 2 federal laws that I became acquainted with as part of this that could be helpful. One actually involves my department. It's called the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. And it was in response to the Bhopal disaster in the 1980s, where thousands of Indians were killed by a chemical release. And in that instance, sadly, it was an odorless aerosol chemical. No one knew it was there until it was killing people. At least in this instance, we had a substance where it had that very distinctive smell, as was alluded to. So there's this law that's already in place that is supposed to give local communities information about the community, about the chemicals in their midst. And then if the chemical is deemed extremely hazardous by the federal government, then there should be an emergency plan to respond to it. Now, the problem perhaps in this instance is MCHM is not considered an extremely hazardous material under that law, and so there was no plan for that law. I think that's something that people should look at. I think that the dearth of knowledge about this chemical show that there are tens of thousands of chemicals and chemical compounds in the stream of commerce that the people who make it know very little about, or not enough about. And the EPA is supposed to be doing research on these chemicals, and they haven't. This is one of the tens of thousands of chemicals where they didn't do the research. I think that's something that can be addressed. The other law doesn't really pertain to my department too much, but there's a Safe Water Drinking Act. And after 9/11, it was amended. It's a very long name, but it's basically the Bioterrorism Act. And it also addresses sites like this that could pose a threat to public health, whether it's an accident or whether it's an intentional act. And I think there's the kind of law that can be addressed and altered as necessary to make sure that at the very least there are plans in place for responding to these sorts of chemical substances that are in our communities already.
Thank you. Chris, the next one is for you. Can you share with us areas where communications practices on a large scale, such as the Elk River spill, might parallel smaller crises like power outages during storms?
Well, it's hard for me to talk about other industries per se, but it just comes down to a matter of companies wanting to communicate out when a crisis event occurs. And with the episode Freedom Industries, not only did they not communicate out immediately to notify the water company, water treatment plant, they actually withheld information, including that a second chemical was involved in that. So what really needs to happen is companies need to be A, made aware of the need to communicate, and B, made aware of the need to communicate directly to water treatment plants in the event of a crisis, because they have a responsibility to do so to the public. And if they don't, just anything very small can suddenly erupt into something the size of what we saw in Charleston, which was international. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Allie, we'll come back to you. This question is from Eric. What would be the best method for Freedom Industries to recover from their embarrassing press conference?
I think, again, drawing the role of playing Monday morning quarterback, it's the level required to recover at this point. I'm not sure how I would guide them through that. I think that, again, going back to what I said earlier about credibility, it's key in this industry. But having said that, I think that the critical mistake that was made there, beyond everything that we've talked about, is thinking that the press conference was going to solve everything, and thinking that the press conference was going to answer all the questions that people had. And I think any approach has to be multi-channel and multi-dimensional. I mean, if you take AEP, post-derecho, they give a great example of how to handle a crisis effectively. They had a press conference. They trained their people. They dispatched their community relations managers. Their teams knew what was going on. Their website was constantly updated with information. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all updated with information, communicating to people who are without power, knowing that if I can get a shower in this 100-degree heat, I will likely also be charging my cell phone, knowing that people would find a way to get the information that they had. Their phone systems, if you were able to make a phone call and call AEP at the time, their messages were there. I think that is a critical example, Katie, and I know I'm not answering your question directly, but I think that the press conference was bad in and of itself, but when you look at the response had to be integrated, and the response failed to be integrated. And without an integrated response, it doesn't reach everybody. You can't assume because you have a press conference that you've talked to everybody. I mean, you guys walk around campus, you don't talk to each other. You listen to the music you want to listen to, when you want to listen to it. You watch TV shows the way you want to watch, when you want to watch them. You don't have to watch commercials if you don't want to. You got your headphones in your ears. You're as social as you want to be on social media, or not at all. You have to find ways to reach people through all the noise. There's so much noise, and I think that that's the biggest opportunity for improvement for any company evaluating what they did wrong, is to find a way to be integrated, multi-dimensional, multi-channel, and to communicate across all mediums and break through the noise so that people hear you.
Great, thank you. Chris, we come back to you with a question from Jess. How long does it take, or what steps need to be taken in order to gain the trust of the public after a crisis like this?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, first of all, and I hate to keep going back to this, but it's so critical, it's just the preparing side, is you have to have the tools in place to communicate. Now, to give you an example, Morgantown Utility Board. When I started there a year ago, actually about 8 months ago, full time, the website was built in 1999. So we had to have a new website that's mobile ready. They didn't have social media in place. We had to get social media in place. Tools we need to communicate, those have to be in place. It's absolutely critical. And in terms of establishing trust, some of the things I talked about, and again, I'll make the presentation available, is you have to take advantage, well, for Morgantown Utility Board, it's taking advantage of the situation in terms of this is what we have in place in Morgantown to protect against these situations. And if you're West Virginia American Water, we've been in this community for a long time. We're part of your community because their workers are certainly part of the community, and making that known. And protecting against another similar event. That's obviously very, very critical. You can't let that happen. And starting to form the relationships with your community partners, because you have to communicate with a very cohesive voice. And if you don't, you're going to cause a lot of confusion that occurred in the previous event.
Thank you. All right. Larry, a question from Alex. If you could handle this crisis again, what would you do differently?
I personally think that it was a benefit to the public that the state held lengthy press conferences where all the reporters got to basically exhaust their questions. And I thought that was a way to make sure that the issues that either they were hearing about or wanted to bring to the forefront were addressed. And we had our in-house experts, so to speak, the Commissioner of Public Health, the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, the Secretary of Environmental Protection, the General of the National Guard, people like that there to field those questions. I thought that was the way to go, and I think that maybe what we should have done it was with more frequency. So like every day until the crisis is at a certain level, all those people were available to answer all the questions that came up, and certainly with all the setbacks that were suffered during this, the additional chemical in the tank, the ever-changing estimate of how much actually leaked, the amount of how much leaked into the ground versus how much went into the water, what's a standard that's protective of public health, and so on. I think that would have been helpful. I talked before about how we try to find what we thought were the best experts in the country, and they are some of the nation's top experts. But that shouldn't have been the only place where we went. I mean, heaven forbid we didn't reach out to the chairman of the chemistry department here or at Marshall and enlisted them and their colleagues to get answers about this chemical. What's the best way to test for it? What can you tell about the possible compounds it could break down to as it's diluted by water? We're trying to do a little bit of that now. A number of academicians came to this area from other states to learn about this or to look into the matter. And one is a South Alabama professor named Andrew Welton, and he was asking a lot of the questions that people have. Is the water safe? What about can this chemical be absorbed by plumbing? And if so, does that make it dangerous in the long term? And because he seemed to be asking the kind of questions that were pressing in the minds of the public, and because he had solid academic credentials, the state approached him and said, can you ask those questions for us? As an independent expert, find people, either we're national expert, international experts, and try to find answers to these questions. And that's where you may have heard about. It's called the WVTAP project, which is testing assessment. And they're going to have a press conference later this week to talk about where they are right now. And I understand that they announced some of the experts that they found, like I said, national and international experts, to answer questions like, was the 1 part per million threshold good advice? And if it isn't, what is good advice? How can we test in homes so people have a peace of mind about whether or not the chemical is still in their households? At what level can you smell this? And should we be concerned if you can smell it? Questions like that. Perhaps someone like Dr. Welton, we should have engaged earlier on in the process. So those are the sorts of things that come to mind.
Thank you. Okay, we have come to our last question, unfortunately, since we're running out of time. Allie, this is for you from Walter. What are the differences between the mass notification of information and the detailed info released in the days following a crisis?
Well, I think that's kind of what I was talking about in the last question, is the need for an integrated response and multidimensional, multi-channel response that works independently to make sure that everyone is hearing your message, that everyone is finding a way to engage some way, that your managers who are out there with people who don't have social media, people who are in nursing homes or families that don't have personal computers, which is becoming less and less, but that they're also getting the same dialogue and the same engagement from the company that other entities are. I think that is important, and it's an opportunity. And I think that you can't assume that people are going to hear what you have to say because you put out a press release, or because you tweeted it at 8 o'clock in the morning, or you put it on Facebook and 5 of your friends liked it and shared it. It's not effective communications. It has to be integrated.
All right, well, thank you all for coming, both audience and speakers. This was very informative. If you would like to continue the conversation, check out the placards in front of each speaker. They have their Twitter handles. Feel free to tweet them questions and continue using the hashtag PRSSA.